Are we recording?
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't had it because I'm assuming it tastes like booty.
Right.
And even if it does taste good, it's probably super bad for you.
I don't know the science behind that, but it could be.
I'm like 95% sure
Yeah.
it's probably terrible for you.
Yeah.
Because it's an energy drink.
Well,
Yeah.
welcome
Anyways, let's
back.
save it for the pod.
Welcome back to the Arroyo Podcast. I'm excited for today.
I'm excited.
We're talking.
Let's go.
Today's episode sponsored by Prime Drinks.
We have a sponsor now.
We have a sponsor.
Prime
Drinks
They don't pay us anything.
They don't
but-
pay us a dime.
Okay.
It's more of a distant partnership, if
Yeah.
anything. But
Yeah.
shout out to Logan. Actually, we're gonna react to a Logan Paul video.
Right. That's why we've been
So
talking about Logan
From
Paul.
Impulsive.
Yeah.
Impulsive.
Should we do
Yeah,
it?
Let's do it.
Roll it.
Why Christianity? There's so many denominations out there, and to be able to like put your foot down on one, especially when they all have such positive teachings for the most part, it's just so hard for me. So why Christianity is
bet.
the question.
All right. The historical evidence is Jesus lived a sinless life. He never sinned once. In John chapter 8, he could look into the faces of his enemies and say, which one of you can prove me guilty of sin? And his enemies were silent. Secondly, he taught amazing ethical teachings that I think all of us respect highly. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. Thirdly, you watch him die. At the moment of his most excruciating pain and agony, nailed to a wooden crossbeam, he prays, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But fourthly, and most importantly, 3 days after he dies, he physically, bodily rises from the dead, and over a period of 40 days, he appears to over 500 people who see him different times, different places, risen from the dead. Paul records in 1 Corinthians 15.
Initial thoughts.
Well, I think his objection to Christianity is, and we were saying this before the podcast, but the reason why I really enjoyed this podcast and liked a lot of things that Logan had to say is I felt like in that 2-hour-long podcast, he basically brought up pretty much all of the culture's
Objections.
most like popular objections to Christianity. And then there's a great guy, Cliff, who I think is a great representative for the Christian faith. Basically got to answer those questions to his audience, most of which are not Christians.
Right.
Yep.
So, I mean, that particular objection in that video, though, of like, okay, there's so many denominations, so how could I even become a Christian when there's so many denominations and they disagree with one another on so many different things? And I think that in one sense is like a legitimate thing to say. Of like, okay, if Christianity is true, why is there so much division among Christians? Why is there like so many denominations? Like what is causing that? And I would say that a part of that isn't Christ-like. Like some of that's just because even though Christians are saved, we're still not perfect. And the honest truth behind a lot of denominations is like some of them were created because there's a little bit different theology in some areas that aren't as clear in the Bible, and that's fine. There's also been some denominations that were created for some not so good reasons, right? I mean, like the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, I went to a Southern Baptist college for my undergrad, and the bottom line is the reason that denomination was created was because they supported slavery, and other Baptists didn't support slavery, and so the Baptists split, and the Southern Baptist Convention was created because originally, not obviously today anymore, but originally they supported slavery. So yes, there's a sense in which denominations point to sin, but Christians or people claiming to be Christians that aren't Christians sinning doesn't point to the fact that Christ wasn't real or didn't live or didn't resurrect. It just points to the fact that people are still works in progress. And it points actually to the fact that we do need Jesus. We do need a savior. But also I think a part of denominations isn't pointing to sin. I think a part of it just points to the fact that the Bible is a complicated book. And yes, there's a lot of essentials that Christians agree on. And in fact, that's one of the things when you do look at the denominations is most of them do agree on the essentials of the Christian faith. They do agree that Jesus lived. They do agree that Jesus was God. They do agree that Jesus died for our sins and resurrected. They do believe that the Bible is the word of God and etc. Right? They do believe in the Trinity, right? That God exists as one being, three persons, all those things. But then they disagree on things like, say, baptism. That's why there's Baptists who, baptize adults after they believe, and Presbyterians, they believe that you can baptize babies. There are different arguments and interpretations of scripture that you can have that can lead to one conclusion or the other. And so, yes, Presbyterians and Baptists are Christians, but they have enough
Christians, but they're in different camps.
But they're in different camps, and so they decide to have different churches with some different values and beliefs, but also, agree on the same beliefs that are the essentials of the faith.
And I think the New Testament reflects this in a lot of ways, because even when Paul is speaking to different churches, those are different contexts and cultures and people groups that he's speaking to that are also relating to Christ in different ways and have different problems. And so I think you find that same reflection happening inside the church today. It's like we have all these different camps, and sure, second, third tier issues. There are things that you go back and forth on that aren't core tenets of the faith that are being debated, but rather, peripheral issues on how we function in the church instead of like what we actually believe in a core foundational way.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. And what we're going to find too is like there are going to inevitably always be Christians that misrepresent Christ.
Yep.
Because we're imperfect people trying to tell people about a perfect God.
Exactly.
And so it's inevitable.
It is. And there's Christians that misrepresent Christ. I mean, there's been times in my life where I've misrepresented Christ in a moment because I fell short. But on the other hand, there's also people that profess to be Christians that aren't Christians.
Yeah.
And they're really misrepresenting Christ. I mean, there are some Christian denominations that aren't Christian at all. They're complete heretics, and they have completely turned away from a lot of the core essential doctrines of the Christian faith. Yet they still call themselves Christians because they want to have some kind of church community thing where they could all get together and, have like this little religious club. But it's not really a Christian community. It's more of a religion of their own making. And so I think, this whole objection though of like denominations, yes, it's something to think through and something to talk through and ask questions about. But ultimately, I think we all agree this isn't really something that can prove Christianity wrong. Really, you got to get to the question of, did Jesus really live? Did Jesus really die? And did Jesus really resurrect? Because these whole issues of denominations, right? Like, if Jesus really did die and rise again, then the whole idea of denominations is irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, I think it's people that are outside looking in, someone like Logan, who actually, I don't know if you watched the full.
I watched pretty much the whole.
He said he got baptized when he was younger.
Yeah, I think so.
And his mom sounds like she's more devout.
She was
her
a
His
Christian,
mom seemed like a full-on Christian. They
she did. They
turned the camera to her and she was holding a little crucifix. I think she's Catholic.
I think a lot of his objections, and this is just me, analyzing from what I see, a lot of his objections are kind of not truly his real concerns with it. I think he has his problem is he doesn't want to submit his actual life to Christ.
Yeah.
And
that's what a lot of people say.
I think that's everybody that's not a Christian is ultimately. Right. I mean, yes, people have intellectual questions and emotional things they're dealing with, or relational hurts in the past in churches that they're dealing with. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think everybody that is not giving their lives to Christ is not giving their lives to Christ because
they don't want to.
Because they don't want to give up control, right? They don't want to place Jesus as Lord in their life. They want to be Lord over their lives. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. I love Cliff too, because he's so good at just grounding the conversation. And I love how...
And not be combative as well. He's actually a really good lesson in how to approach people like this.
Very tactical.
With like disarming them kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like in a very kind way.
We should link that pod in the...
totally.
Sure.
In the notes for this.
Well, it was great because even when he was talking about other faiths, he's talking about Muslims.
Yeah.
And he did a really great job of going, hey, this is where Christianity and whatever other religion, this is how they kind of intersect, but this is where they're different. And actually, I respect what they do here, but this is what disconnects this from Christianity. And he's just so good at laying out evidence, historical evidence of who Jesus is, which, if you're listening to right now and you're feeling inadequate on like how to have a conversation with an unbeliever or somebody who has questions about your faith, it's like, man, you don't have to have all the answers, but a really great place to start for somebody who is questioning is just bringing it back to the person of Jesus and bringing it back to the historical evidence of who he was. So I think that's a good place to start for a lot of people. But
I completely agree. And like you said, you don't have to have all the answers to be able to have these conversations. But if you do want to grow so that you can be better at having these types of conversations with people as you share the gospel of Jesus with people in your circle, whether it's your friends, your family, like your coworkers, acquaintances, neighbors, like whoever it is, I actually think going to his channel, Cliff's channel. Do you know what his channel is called? I think it's like
Ask Cliff.
Yeah, it's like ask the question.
He's blown up
like that.
It's called
a
Ask
ton in the last year on TikTok.
Yeah,
Like crazy.
I've been watching him
And
for
he's
like
been
4
doing it for
years.
decades.
I know.
too.
We've been,
And
I
he's
feel
been
like
doing it for decades. But
I mean, I feel like you guys have seen him even like
I literally been
clips
watching
of
his
him when
YouTube
we were
videos.
even younger though, because he's been doing it for
Yeah.
probably
Like since the
30
90s.
years.
Yeah, he's done
Yeah,
it in
college
college
campuses.
He goes to college campuses and just debates students. It's awesome.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
watching one of the
he's
clips last
definitely
night.
an OG. That's
He
for
is.
sure.
Yeah,
in
I
the
mean,
faith.
that takes a lot of guts to be able to go on a college campus and just like take any and all questions
Yeah.
and just kind of go for it on the fly. But I think one of the things at least I've noticed in like him going to college campuses and other apologists and speakers that do similar things is ultimately there's really only about 12 questions or more
Mhm.
that literally just get asked over and over
So
again in
true.
different ways. And so if you learn to have answers to those questions,
Yeah.
you kind of got a pretty good direction on like, you know, and a
100%.
good idea of like where
Yeah.
these conversations are going to go. Like it's going to be you know,
homosexuality. Why does God
homosexuality,
condemn
it's going to be abortion,
religions.
it's going to be, you know,
Yeah.
resurrect, like historicity for the resurrection of
Mhm.
Jesus. It's going to be like questions about the Bible and is it really reliable? It's
Mhm.
going to be, you know, is God real or,
Mhm.
you know, the Big Bang, that type of stuff.
Evolution,
You know,
question-
you might
yeah.
get some stuff in, you know, morality and ethics. You know, how can we know what's good? How can we know what's bad? Do we need God to know what's good and bad, or do we not need God to know what's good and
Yeah.
bad? All those types of things. And so, but if you're looking for resources, I think Cliff's channel is a great place to look. Also, I would say, I want to do
Always
another
be
plug.
ready.
Always be ready.
.com.
Alwaysbeready.com.
It's my father-in-law.
It's his father-in-law.
good.
Charlie Campbell. He's
right.
he
He's really
is
good.
an apologist and travels the country and speaks at churches
And
how-
has spoken at our church
he's also
twice.
an author too. And he's got
I'd love to see him and Cliff together.
oh totally.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I tell Sayla this all the time. Like he would be, I feel like he would blow up so much more if he like put his stuff on social media. More.
Yeah.
But he's just
He doesn't do that.
stays in his lane a little bit. And
Yeah.
but yeah, he's great. He has an awesome website if you want to check that out. Always
Yeah,
be
a lot of
ready.com.
good resources there. Also,
Great
I like Sean
articles.
McDowell. If you want to
Yeah.
just look up
Yeah,
his
he's good
YouTube
too.
channel, Sean McDowell's really good too.
That's good.
So yeah, but I like alwaysbeready.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shout out Charlie.
A cool story about Cliff though.
Yeah.
First of all, for all you content creators out there, he grinded for decades.
So long, man.
So keep making your videos.
That's
I think
right.
that's a
He
great
waited
point.
decades before his stuff went viral.
Yep.
Before God really used him on a massive scale like that. Obviously, he was
Yeah.
using them in a small way, but
Now he's on the biggest
biggest
podcast in the
podcast
world.
ever. And even how that happened was a really cool story of.
Yeah.
I mean, so Logan Paul's partner
George
George
Janko.
Janko
Was he left the show or was kicked off the show?
so he was on the show and he started getting more vocal about his faith.
That's right.
And then he kind of became the Christian guy, like in that
Yeah.
circle. And Logan would just kind of attack
on
him
him.
all the
Bully
time,
him.
bully him, pick on him about his faith specifically. And then it finally got to the point where he left. And then Georgienko has started his own podcast
And it's
since,
blown
right? And
up.
it's blown up like crazy.
Totally.
And he talks about faith basically in every podcast. I mean, that's what it's really,
Yeah.
he has mostly faith-based people on.
Yeah.
And he had Cliff on.
Yeah.
And then that's how Logan that's the reason why Logan had Cliff on his podcast.
I love that God
And then
uses
God
that.
used that. And now, like you said, Logan really represents the culture and how
Totally.
they, like, he's the biggest thing in
Yeah.
the culture, especially for young people.
Oh my
And
gosh.
those same questions, all of his audience probably asked those same questions, and
Yeah.
he got to
Right.
directly answer them on the biggest podcast in the whole world. It's just
Right.
crazy to think
Yeah,
about that story
he's
and how
pretty much
God
the
used
biggest
that.
behind maybe just Joe Rogan. Maybe is there?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think
He's up there. He's
yeah,
top
up
3,
there.
I think.
Yeah.
Definitely a top 3.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is unbelievable to think about
And we are
the
sponsored by him.
Yeah, sponsored
Right.
by Prime. Sponsored by Prime.
Yeah.
Not really. But have you ever actually had a Prime?
No, never.
You really? Have
No.
you?
No, I refuse.
Whoa, you should
Yeah.
try it. It actually tastes. pretty good.
I don't know that it. Like,
I'm not a
tastes
drinker. I'm not a
good.
Prime
I mean, it's
drinker.
Gatorade, basically, right?
No,
Really?
they use coconut water.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, it's actually. I mean, if I
Are
had
you
to
claiming Prime is healthy?
I'm not pro Prime, but if I had to choose between,
Wait, I thought we were sponsored by Logan
Oh,
Paul.
wait,
So
sorry. My apologies to the sponsor. But if I had to choose between like a Gatorade and Prime, I would choose Prime because they don't have like high fructose syrup or
Red 40.
Red 40, all that junk.
Yeah, if you didn't know, Gatorade is really unhealtty for
terrible for you.
And it's owned by Pepsi. So
Right.
just a little idea that it's not much more healthy than Pepsi.
It's also have some.
Oh, it is. The same people that make soda are making your Gatorade. It's not a healthy
Crazy.
athletic
And
drink.
Dasani water.
Yeah, exactly.
And Smart Water.
There you go. Yeah,
They're all on that too.
They are.
So we're kind of talking about contending for the faith a little bit in a culture that is hostile to God. I think that's a really good transition to what we were talking about on Sunday a little bit.
Absolutely. What you were talking about on Sunday,
Well,
bringing
yeah,
down the house,
Thanks, man.
preaching
good.
up a storm. I loved it.
Appreciate it.
Did a good job.
Yeah, I was actually sweating up there. I got to stop wearing jackets on Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's a yeah.
I was just like sweating. But yeah. Do you have any like initial thoughts about where we were in Daniel chapter 3?
Mm-hmm.
If you could list out all 3 points, that'd be great. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
But
one of the points was like
Faith
darkness.
Under Fire was your title. I like that. Faith Under Fire.
One of the points is darkness will try and drag you down.
Yeah,
Kind of talking about how Babylon represents this fallen culture.
Logan Paul.
Yeah, and really
Logan Paul is King Nebuchadnezzar in that story. No,
yes. But this overarching theme all throughout Daniel is like faithful commitment to God under oppressive conditions, where the environment is hostile to God, but yet there's a remnant of people left that are still unwavering in their commitment towards God. And so, I don't know, I think it'd be kind of cool to have a little bit of a conversation around that.
Well, I think it's great to have a conversation around that because, as you mentioned already on Sunday a lot, but we live in a time where our culture is becoming more increasingly, opposed to the things of God and opposed to the Bible, opposed to Christianity. And so it's actually a very relevant passage for the time in which we live.
Yep.
And, I think in the past in American history, you can kind of just like be a Christian or claim to be a Christian and go to church. And it was actually to your benefit.
Yeah.
You can kind of network and meet the community and, and feel good about yourself. But now it's like there really isn't any social benefit to going to church. So if you're going to go to church, it's really because you're actually interested or wanting to get involved
on the church, but
more.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, now we live in this time where, to claim Christian values and beliefs, you could lose your job.
Yeah.
You could lose a relationship. You could lose money. You could lose a lot of things. We're not quite at the point like some countries are.
We were just having that conversation.
Korea in the Middle East
China,
where you're going to lose your life.
Right.
Although we have seen a higher, I'd say, rate of
hostility.
Churches having like shootings in the last few years. I mean, I've noticed that a lot. On the news, it seems like every 2 weeks there's a new person.
Even Christian schools.
Yeah.
The Nashville shooting.
Yeah.
I think that was last year.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
So,
and that shooter came out and said, "I did this because you're Christian."
100%. And they didn't report it in the news.
And it's because they
that
were
part of the story.
Transgender.
They were,
Yes.
Yeah. One question Griffin asked last night when we were talking about this was like a point, basically a point in our life where we've felt persecuted, right? And that's kind of the question you asked, right?
Yeah.
For your faith, and basically how that panned out and what God did through that and all that stuff. And I brought up the discussion that I kind of felt guilty about that question a little bit because I thought about those other countries and I'm like, and nobody at the table when we actually really answered that. Like, they were quick to jump to an answer. Everybody was really thinking deeply. Yeah. And it's because we just read the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego where they're literally being thrown into the fire for their
allegiance to God. And the worst that I could maybe come up with was a guy looking at me awkwardly and just staying silent after I said something to him. Like, like that was my persecution and awkward social interaction. And maybe not being invited back or something. Yeah.
Or, not having a new friend anymore because he thinks it's weird. So I said I felt guilty about it a little bit. This kind of American persecution. And I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, this persecution is persecution, but it was tough for me to think about, a guy in North Korea getting run. Like I've seen videos where they line up Christians and literally run a steamroller over them. I don't know if you've ever seen that video. Yeah. You know, guys in Africa getting hacked up.
Pastors being in prison, missionaries being in prison, tortured.
I just read an article about an American couple in, I think it's somewhere in South America or something like that.
In Haiti?
Was it Haiti? Yeah, it was Haiti. That got, they ran into their
Facebook friends with that girl's dad. I don't even know how
that's crazy.
That's Facebook crazy. Friends with that girl's dad.
Oh, really?
He posted and it was like, I'm heartbroken. Like I lost my daughter who's like a missionary in Haiti. Her and her husband were killed and like by a gang.
Just ran into their school. They tried to hide. They found him. They shot him. They cut him up and then burned him. It's crazy. I mean, like that. Like when you ask me about the persecution story, I feel bad saying my awkward encounter persecution story after hearing stuff like that.
And I would say even what we experience here in America, maybe I wouldn't even call it persecution. I would just say it's opposition.
That's
whereas that is persecution, you know, overseas.
Like a soft
opposition is still very real. It's just not to the same level.
Yeah. So I think an important point is first, really, really revel in the thankfulness that we don't have to go
for the time being. Yes. Yeah.
For the time, for this time in our lives right now. Sure,
it's not promised.
It's not promised.
That's
for sure.
Something we were talking about last night.
America is an anomaly historically,
and every day that we live in it,
freedom of speech, freedom of religion,
and we've seen.
I mean, America isn't as free now as it was. I'd say
not only
as far as religion goes, even when we were kids.
But even the point we're at, but even the point we're at now is 100 times better than all of human history,
exactly,
all of Christian history, and 70% of the world probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
which is crazy. So be thankful for that. That's the first thing.
Yeah, I think there's this balance between being really grateful for where we're at right now, but also aware of the fact that there has been a sense of it degrading since we've been kids, especially. There's been a sharp decline in terms of friendliness towards the church, and then also just hostility and people silencing the church, the government.
Labeling what we believe is to be, your beliefs are hateful. Not it basically it shifted from the culture saying we agree with your beliefs to we disagree with your beliefs to now today it's labeled as your beliefs are hateful. When you verbalize that, that's hate speech and it's wrong. And actually, you deserve to be punished for it. And so I think that's the next stage in the development. If things don't get better, is it goes from what you believe is hateful to now because it's hateful, you deserve to be punished or penalized, or in some ways, whether that's going to end up in churches losing their tax exempt status, or
they're trying to do that,
getting thrown into prison.
They are trying to do that,
or whatever.
They are trying to.
And that happened in Canada, by the way. There are several pastors in Canada that have been imprisoned for speaking out. On certain cultural issues with a biblical perspective. And we're not Canada, but
they're saying, I mean, they do say Canada is like 15, 20 years ahead of America in terms of like
progressiveness.
In terms of like culturally.
Yep.
And I mean, we're on that trajectory right now in terms of hostility, and a lot of major, we're not trying to get political right now, but it's just a fact. And it's a reality of which we have to operate in, is like there are political, influential people that are wanting to move our country into that direction. They actually think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's concerning. So I think it's just, we're not trying to scare people. We were talking about last night. I don't think there's anything to be afraid of. But I do think that as followers of Christ, we have to ask ourselves the question is like,
are you ready?
Are you ready for that? And are you ashamed of Christ? Because we talked about that on Sunday a little bit. In Mark chapter 8, Jesus tells the disciples, for whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. This is a really intense passage, but it's the truth. If anyone's ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels.
Yeah.
And it's such a really struck a chord with me. And also just as we were talking last night about it, because Man, I would rather sacrifice being in the same current as the culture and still stand with Christ. I would rather, have other people exile me, excommunicate me, persecute me than for me to lose my allegiance with Christ. I'd rather stand with him and not be unashamed about my faith than to lose everything by standing with the world, basically.
Well, and I think too, like, there's no reason to be ashamed about Christ.
No.
So why would you be ashamed about Christ to people when there's nothing to be ashamed of?
Right.
He's the God that created you. He's the God that loves you. He's the God that died for you. He's the God that rose again for you. He's the God that offers heaven to you.
Yes.
What's there to be ashamed of?
Yes.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the only reason why you'd be ashamed of him is because you care more about what people think than what he thinks, which does not make any sense, because Jesus said, why would you be afraid of the people that can kill your body when I have the ability to not only kill your body, but your soul? And so why would you be afraid of the person that could kill your body when really, when you die, that's the moment you meet God face to face.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be afraid of men. You should be, in a healthy way, afraid of God, have a reverence for God, because he's the one that actually holds your eternal destiny in his hands. People, they have a very, very small impact. Like the worst thing that a person can do to you is kill you. And if you're a Christian, that's a blessing, not a curse, because death is a doorway to heaven. And so there is no, if you really do believe what Christ says, if you really do believe in what Christianity teaches, if you really are a Christian and you're filled with the Holy Spirit, there's actually no logical reason to be afraid or to be ashamed of the gospel.
But it's fear.
It's true.
People are controlled by fear. That's why he says, whoever's ashamed of me in this sinful and adulterous generation. When you're living in a generation that's corrupt, and a generation, and this is every generation, right? Every generation has its own sin that is marked by. But in the time that we're living in, so deceptive, people are confused about their own identity, about who they are, their place in the world. And the devil is preying on people's fears. And I think it's going to take a group of people to rise up and be outspoken about their faith and to not be afraid of associating themselves with Christ in this time, to instill a sense of courage in people to go, hey, listen, like, I'm not afraid of these people. I'm not afraid if you cancel me or try and persecute me to whatever extent that they can. Like, I'm going to unabashedly associate
regardless
myself with
of the consequences.
Regardless.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that we're crazy or we do things that are out of character. It just means that we don't compromise our faith.
Yeah. Right. Regardless of the consequences. And sorry, Dakota, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say even further than that is Jesus says to rejoice about persecution.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is even another step towards that. When you were talking about, it's great. We're moving in that path, and it is a bummer, but also rejoice, because persecution may be coming, and God really blesses the persecuted.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think the reason why a person is blessed when they are persecuted is because when you're being persecuted, number one, it's a sign that your faith is actually genuine. Because if you're willing to endure persecution, it means that your faith is actually genuine, right? You're going through the fire, but it's being refined like gold in the fire.
Yeah.
But then also too, I think the promise is like in the midst of the persecution, God brings his presence. And in the midst of persecution, he gives peace. And I think that gets to one of my favorite parts in the passage that you spoke on, was when they're put into the fire, Jesus is actually with them in the fire. And so I think that's why we don't have to be afraid when we share our faith, or when we're facing opposition or in the persecution, is you don't have to be afraid, because when you're thrown into the fire, you're not thrown into the fire alone, that Jesus is actually with you and he's for you. And whether he saves you from that fire or not is really irrelevant, because if he's with you in it and you have the hope of heaven, there's nothing to be afraid of. And I think that's one of the things I love the most in that story.
It's so beautiful.
Is they're like,
I love that.
To King Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to listen to you. We're not going to worship you. We're going to worship God. And if you're going to throw us in the fire, so be it. Yeah. And we believe that God can save us from the fire. My favorite phrase, but even if he doesn't, we still will not worship you.
That's right.
And so it's this idea of like, listen, I'm not afraid. And here's the thing. You want to come after me? Well, God is God.
Yeah.
He can rescue me from you. You're just a mere mortal. But even if he doesn't rescue me from you, and I do end up dying, I still will not be afraid because God is my protector and my deliverer, and the Lord's my shepherd. He walks with me through the darkest valley. I don't have to be afraid. He's with me. Yeah.
They said the God whom we serve is able to deliver us.
Yeah.
And when you trust that God can deliver you, that he can save you from your enemies, from the worst of situations, gives you a real sense of peace in your life. Something we were talking about on Sunday too was how many people compromise in their faith, or maybe they stop short in an area in their life and they miss out on seeing God deliver them, or miss out from experiencing breakthrough. Like imagine if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if they had compromised their faith in that moment, they never would have been able to see Jesus and the fire with them. They never would have gotten to experience the deliverance. The Bible says that not even a hair on their head was singed from the fire. Their clothes remained intact, but the one thing that was burnt was their chains. So they were unbound in the fire, walking around with Jesus, but they never would have been able to experience that deliverance if they didn't have the faith to be able to step into the fire.
Yeah.
And, for anyone who's going through it right now, whether it's, self-inflicted suffering or suffering that's coming from, following Jesus or just your circumstances, like believe that Jesus is going to find you in that place because he can.
That's right.
And he will. And it might not always, and to have the faith to say, even if he doesn't, like God can, this is what we're talking about. Like God can do it. He can deliver. And this is a biblical faith. It's saying, I believe God can, but even if he doesn't, I'm not going to compromise.
Yeah, and I love that because it's a faith in saying God can do anything, so I'm going to trust him. But also, he might have a plan that is actually includes me going through this trial, includes me dying, includes me suffering, includes me, going through whatever trial it is. And I think like this is a great principle to apply when asking God for healing. Or asking God for a breakthrough in your job, or asking God like for whatever. It's to come to him in humility and in faith and say, okay, God, I trust that you could heal this person from cancer. Yeah. And I ask that you will, but even if you don't, I'll still worship you. Even if you don't, I'll still be faithful to you. And maybe ask yourself that question. Is that your attitude? Is that your heart towards God? Because I think a lot of the times our attitude is this. Oh, I believe that God can deliver me from this, but if he doesn't, I will not still worship him.
Right.
And what that reveals to you is you are not worshiping God. You're worshiping what you think God can give you.
Right.
You're not worshiping God. You're worshiping the healing, the health. You're not worshiping God. You're worshiping the job that you want. You're not worshiping God. You're worshiping the person you want to marry. Right? You're worshiping the breakthrough. You're not worshiping the God of the breakthrough.
Yeah.
And so I think what we need to do is we got a lot to learn from these guys of like, okay, I'm going to have faith in God that he can deliver me. He can rescue me. But at the end of the day, I'm not worshiping him because he's delivering me from this trouble. I'm worshiping him because he's delivered me from the greatest trouble, which is my own sin.
Yeah, that's it.
And how my sin has separated me from him and how it has actually destined me for eternity from him in hell. But Jesus went through hell for me on the cross and rose again 3 days later so that if I place my faith in him, I can be delivered from the worst trouble, which is separation from him forever. He went through the worst fire so I wouldn't have to spend eternity in the fire of hell. And so because of that, I don't need to be afraid of any fire. I can trust that he can deliver me from any fire. But if I don't get delivered from that fire, I don't need to fear because I know I won't have to suffer the worst fire.
It's beautiful.
And I just wonder, like, if you're listening right now, do you trust God that he's enough even if he doesn't?
Yeah.
Do you trust God even if he doesn't? I know for myself, there are times in my life where it's hard.
It is hard.
I just want to trust God for him to take it away.
Yeah.
For him to give me what I want. But true biblical faith is saying, God, I trust that you are enough. Yeah. And I trust that you can take it away. But even if you don't, I trust you.
And I would go as far as to say anything that we can't attach that faith statement to, it's probably an idol in our life.
Yep. Yeah.
Something that we're
That's
holding.
a good test.
Yeah. We can't look at the dream or the deliverance that we're praying for, or a situation that we're praying for, or a healing, whatever, and go, God, here's what I'm desiring. This is what I'm praying for. But if you don't come through in this way, then I still trust you. That thing's probably an idol in your life.
No, 100% is.
It's you're worshiping that outcome or that thing. And to just be wary of that. And what's really cool though is they allow God into the situation.
Yeah.
And not only does he deliver them, but that testimony causes King Nebuchadnezzar, and we can get to this part of the story. There's just so much scripture there in that chapter. But he ends up praising God, and he ends up making a decree for everyone to not worship him anymore, but to actually worship God.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot there.
Oh my gosh, there's so much there.
It's a domino effect. That's a pagan culture. It's a culture where most of the people did not have a relationship with God. They worship
multiple
idols.
gods.
But this kind of, I would say, maybe a mini revival or a breakthrough of the good news of who God is kind of breaking into their world. And I think that's a great principle for us to bring into our lives today. If you want to see revival happen in today's world, it actually starts with Christians being at the tip of the spear and saying, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm not going to be ashamed, and I'm going to go and I'm going to share the message, even if it means losing my job or having that awkward conversation or whatever it is, whatever opposition it is.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You do have to count the cost.
You do.
And this is what I was reading the other night before I was going to bed. It's like Jesus says, pick up your cross, deny yourself, right? And follow me. But then what does he say right after that? Well, he says, before you do that though, count the cost, right? Because who goes to war with another country when, that country has way more people than you do? You're going to lose. Count the cost. If you're way outnumbered, instead of fighting them, send a delegate to them and negotiate some kind of peace treaty. Don't fight a battle that you're obviously going to lose. If you're starting a building project, don't start the building project and then not have enough money or enough materials to complete the project. And so I think count the cost.
Yeah.
Are you really willing to lay it out on the line for Jesus? And are you really willing to understand what that's going to cost you? What that is going to entail for your life? And once you count that cost, then you can commit, and you're actually making a more genuine commitment to Christ and sharing who he is to the world. So I think a lot of people, they don't count the cost. And then once they get into it and they realize what it actually does cost, they're like, oh, that's too heavy of a price for me to pay.
Jeez.
I'm not willing to do that. But the irony of that,
you gain the whole world and lose your soul.
That's right. So you think, following Jesus is too much of a cost. Well, friend, if you don't follow Jesus, there's a bigger cost. It's called your life. You lose it.
Yeah.
And so actually, the smarter move, the better investment, the lower cost you pay is actually by counting the cost and giving it all away to Christ. Because as you give it to him, you get even more back.
Yeah.
I want to talk about too, another aspect of the story is we're talking about counting the cost and, understanding that everyone is bowing down to something in their life. We were created to worship, and we're hardwired to worship. Our hearts have this deep longing to connect with God. But the default position is in our sinful nature to fill that void with something or someone else. And so we're all setting ourselves apart for worship, but not everyone's worshiping God. Not everybody's worshiping Christ. And on Sunday, we talked about how, they had King Nebuchadnezzar, they had set up the image so that they would worship him. But the word that they used was dedication, which another way to say that is consecration. And the word for that was Hanukkah, which is fun. But it's to set apart something for a holy purpose. And every person was designed to be set apart for a holy purpose. So I think a question to kind of ask yourself is man, what have you been worshiping lately? What are you devoted to? What are you dedicated to? How have you designed your life? Is it designed to look more like the world, or does it look more like and emulate Jesus in a way. So I don't know. I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit because I feel like that's a really important part of the passage, kind of sets up this image as like, you're either bowing down to the world or you're bowing down to Christ. And like, what does that look like on an everyday level to devote yourself, to dedicate yourself to Jesus?
Well, what would you guys say most people are dedicated to?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, most people are probably dedicated to money, sex, and themselves, right? Betterment of themselves. But actually, what's funny is I saw a clip on YouTube where this gentleman who is definitely not a Christian, he was interviewing somebody and he said, I wonder if there would be, he basically said, I wonder if in like 10 to 20 years, there's going to be churches for celebrities because we kind of, this is a non-Christian saying this. And he's like, because everybody kind of needs to worship something. And, like I want to worship Taylor Swift and I want to be involved in everything that she does. I want to put her higher than this thing.
Well, there's Christians and then there's Swifties.
And then his guest goes, guest goes, that's what religious people are. That's what he said. And
instead of tithing, you just pay $5,000 for a ticket.
Right. No, he brought up all these points. He's like,
That's true.
And the non-Christian guy was like, everybody's kind of in a religion. Everybody's religious. Just it's what you're religious about. And 100%. I guarantee, I can see in like 10 to 20 years, there being like the Church of Taylor Swift. Like,
yeah, there already is.
Like a building where people gather and there basically
in San Francisco, they had a service that was like a Beyonce service.
Really?
And the place was packed out.
Yeah.
So where they would sing Beyonce songs and they were basically like conducting like a Beyonce worship service.
Right.
Insane.
It is insane.
It's a real thing to have. You can Google it.
And it's crazy that people realize like, I
guess
I'm
so
made
crazy
to worship,
though, I think
still not going to worship God.
Every human heart, right? God designed our heart to have a throne on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he is the only one designed to sit on that throne.
That's right.
But the bottom line is if he's not sitting there, someone or something else will. Because we have a void if Jesus isn't there. So we often try to fill that void with other people or other things. But I think about this for a second. Like let's go with the Taylor Swift thing. Because I think she's probably the most popular person on the planet
right now. Yeah.
At the moment, right now.
Yeah.
So if say a group of Swifties are around her right after a concert and she walks by them, there's going to be this moment where they see her and they're like, oh yeah, it's her. Like there's this awe, there's this wonder, there's this, oh my gosh, she's so talented. She's so incredible. Just to even be in her presence is astounding. It's incredible. So if people experience that with a finite, screwed up, normal person that doesn't even have songs that are that good.
Whoa,
you went there.
Swifties are coming.
They're coming. This is not a
for you.
Swiftie podcast. No, hey, listen, I like some of her songs.
Fortnite's
but also, I will say this. You just come on. Let's be real. There are a lot better artists out there. But anyways, if one person or a group of people can be around a celebrity and have that sense of awe and wonder, how much so do you think it will be when we all stand in the presence of God, who literally is so much greater, so much bigger, so much more incredible than any of us could ever think and imagine? Like I just think of Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah is in the throne room and he sees God face to face.
Yeah.
And he's completely undone.
Yeah.
He's completely in awe. He's in complete wonder. So ultimately, I think that the reason why we worship people like that is because we want a little taste of what it is to actually be in the presence of God. And because we don't live oftentimes by faith, but we do live by sight. The Bible says we should live by faith and not by sight, but we don't see God. So we want to worship what we can see rather than who we cannot see. And it's like, well, I could see Taylor. I could see her singing. I'm 22. Dear. I threw that in there. But we can see her. We could hear her music. We could see her posing with Travis Kelce. And oh my gosh, they're such an incredible couple. And I hope they get married and live happily ever after.
Running on the field.
So made me barf after the Super Bowl.
I also think there's a portion of this that And Jordan Peterson was just actually talking about this that I saw. It's when you
also another sponsor of the podcast.
Another sponsor of the podcast.
We are sponsored by Jordan Peterson
and Prime Drinks.
And Prime Drinks. Those are some two pretty different sponsors. Logan Paul and Jordan Peterson. We had a very wide array, a very diverse group of sponsors. We do like to thank our sponsors. We have both sides.
Mm-hmm. No, he was talking about how people complain depression is relevant or, rampant.
Yeah.
And usually the best way to keep falling down in more and more depression is to basically keep thinking about it, keep thinking about yourself and dwell on it. And we've touched on this in other podcasts. And I think that's another main reason that people need to dwell on things like Taylor Swift, because it allows them to not dwell on the issues that they're facing. The internal issues, the external issues. Whoa. It's a distraction, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you need to fill that empty spot that if you don't fill with anything, you're going to be depressed and fall into something. You need to fill it with Jesus because he's going to, those problems, like we said, if you fix those problems, great. If not, we still trust you. But I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I like what you're saying though, because I think a lot of people, myself included, could have a death by distraction.
Right.
Where rather than trying to overcome the depression with focusing on God and who he is and what his plan is for your life and the purpose that he has for your life and the hope that he has for your life and his word and how it's active and relevant to your life and how it can transform you from the inside out in the here and now. Rather than filling our mind with who God is, we try to empty our mind by just distracting ourselves with things that really aren't that important.
Such as Taylor Swift.
And I think that there's a healthy role in life. Like, I don't think there's never a place to do things that are fun, to do things that are distracting. I think there's a healthy place for that in life. Well, if you're doing them for a
distraction, then that's unhealthy. If you're doing them to enjoy, that's healthy.
Yeah.
If you're doing them because your cup's already filled, and you just want to enjoy the creation that God has put us in, right?
Yeah.
Then that's healthy. Definitely enjoy those things.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it as a distraction because there's a hole in your heart that is there and you're not filling it with Jesus.
Yeah. It's good.
I feel like this is a good place to kind of settle the convo.
Yeah, I like
Any concluding thoughts on this?
Dakota?
Any concluding thoughts?
Final statement
on Faith Under Fire. Or Taylor Swift, or Logan Paul, or Cliff. Yeah. I can't pronounce the dude's last name. Kinich or something like that.
That's right. I'm just, I've been reflecting about this since your sermon and also since our discussions, is that I just been putting myself in a place of persecution, and if it keeps going towards that, and I'm excited to equip myself to be ready for that.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. I've actually been thinking a lot about that and been more excited than
me too.
Nervous. You know what I mean? Yeah. Obviously I don't want that to happen. Right. To stand for Christ, to have an opportunity to do that. And, you actually mentioned yesterday, I don't know if we can cut this from the pod if we want, but
we can cut it. We have to.
You mentioned someone that we knew that said when you were younger that she was a Christian authority in our lives.
Yeah.
And she said,
I'll tell you who it was after.
I probably would, if someone put a gun to my head and said, renounce God, I'd probably do it and then ask for forgiveness after because I just can't do it. And that really hit me. I'm like, oh my gosh.
It really struck me.
Because she was
an honest answer, at least.
It is very honest for sure. That's
a very godly person like in our world at that time.
But she taught us stuff and she was like a Christian kind of authority figure. And to say that, I don't know, it shook me a little bit. And I'm right? Man, would I never really do that? Like, would I stand actually if someone got to my head? And I'm telling myself I will, but
I would pull a Jesus on them and I'd ask them a question. There you go.
Well, and then
I'm going to answer your question with the question of who do you say Jesus is? And then
see that guy that takes the gun real quick?
The whole gun. I've watched way too many action movies.
You really have.
I've watched The Matrix one too many times.
That's awesome.
I'm the chosen one, Neo.
Anyways,
I've been thinking about it a lot too.
Yeah,
that's good.
And I think that's a good. I don't think it's unhealthy to say like, I would I pray that
You think
in that moment.
I would think about it in that moment.
Oh yeah, in that moment. Like I don't want to have to make that decision in the moment. I want to be able to make it in my heart beforehand.
The Spirit will lead. If you're really a Christian, the Spirit will lead you. And here's the thing: even if you do deny, it's not like God will reject you. Who denied? Peter.
Peter.
Do you know this man? Yeah, he did, exactly. But he still did it, and God forgave him and restored him. He did it 3 times, and he cussed, and he said, I don't even bleeping know that guy.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and why? It was because Jesus was about to be crucified, and he didn't want to be crucified alongside him. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, there's a time where people fail, and they live in fear. But even in that, God can forgive and restore you to even greater ministry than before. But also, God, there's a place to run away. You know, you look in the book of Acts and Paul's getting persecuted and he's like, all right, I'm out of here. And he runs and he escapes. Yeah. But then there also comes a point in his life and the life of Peter's lives and in other lives, like Stephen, the first Christian martyr, where it's like, you know what? I can't run away. And you know what? I'm going to take this one on the chin and I'm going to die for Jesus. And the reason why I can go through this fire is because I died for Jesus. Jesus is with me. And I love that picture. And maybe will be kind of my closing thought. We've been kind of talking about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and faith through the fire. It's like Stephen, the very first Christian martyr.
Yeah.
It says that as they are stoning him to death, that the sky split open and he saw Jesus. And I really do believe that as people are dying, that are Christians or people that are being killed for their faith, I believe that God sends his angels or even himself to you to take your hand and bring you home.
I believe
so because of that, you don't need to be afraid.
Yeah.
What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Get to meet Jesus. That's a pretty good deal.
And I'll end with this. Anything you lose on this side of eternity for the sake of Christ, God will reward you for that. He will reward you for that into eternity. And so, we love you guys. If you made it this far on the podcast, thank you for listening.
We are sponsored by Jordan Peterson and Logan Paul. Drinks and Prime.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. See you guys.
Subscribe.
Subscribe, comment, share.